Welcome to Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point. I'm Lu Xin. In this series, I dissect stories that are making headlines around the world and talk to my guests to compensate for the missing pieces of the puzzle. So join us in real time by sending us your comments or questions via the CGTN page on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube or Weibo. If you're watching this live on the CGTN application, email me at thepointwithalex@cgtn.com. Let me know what you think. We start our live streaming every Friday at 11 a.m. Beijing time, so do get in touch and we might just read out your comments. Before we get to today's topic, some feedback from last week's show about my media critique on the AP's article about birth control being forced on Uyghur women in Xinjiang. One viewer said, visit free from pre-arranged tour and surveillance is the best way to prove your point, which you vehemently reject. You can't blame others suspect you. So if you live in a house and you don't allow others to barge in and do as they wish, are you the one to blame? Do others have the right to suspect, even smear you? Another feedback, China doesn't have to be in defensive mode. Spoke the truth, that's it. The West will continue harboring how China has human rights abuse, no free speech, reduces misinformation and manipulates figures. These will not go away of their mind. The West is not bending, no need to defend anymore. Well, to a certain degree, I must say I agree with it. But if we don't lay out the facts, if we don't speak for ourselves, there will be too much injustice and misinformation or disinformation. I believe we have a right and a need to have the mic. Anyway, thank you for the comments. Please keep them coming and stay on the point. Now, this week, we're looking at media coverage of cooperation between China and Iran, a 25-year pact in the works, and the perceived threats this has conjured up. A bit of a background first. July 14th marked the 5th anniversary of the signing of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, aka the Iran nuclear deal. It had been painstakingly negotiated by multiple parties, including Iran, the US, China, and the EU. I was in Europe and spent countless hours reporting, countless days reporting on round after round of negotiations. I was actually in the room when the deal was announced. Mixed feelings. I still remember, after a long and hard process, sometimes it was almost unbearable for negotiators and journalists alike. But the deal has been hailed as a model of multilateral diplomacy and worked as a significant factor in maintaining regional peace and stability. Unfortunately, in May 2018, the Trump administration shredded this UN-endorsed and registered agreement into pieces. As part of its maximum pressure campaign, the administration slapped unilateral sanctions back on the country, sanctions that, according to international human rights watchers, have had a debilitating impact on the people, especially amid the COVID-19 crisis. I'll elaborate later. Now, China still honors the deal and its commitments. According to a Chinese Foreign Ministry statement this week, no matter how the international situation evolves, China will always stand on the right side of history and work with other parties to the JCPOA to continue advancing the political and diplomatic resolution of the Iranian nuclear issue. But for China and Iran, their cooperation goes beyond the nuclear deal. In fact, China has a long-standing commercial relationship with Iran. China is Iran's biggest commercial partner, even as bilateral trade dropped by about 1/3 in 2019 due to sanctions. The figure still totaled $23 billion. China is a big importer of Iranian oil and a major exporter of manufactured goods, as well as a major investor. Between 2005 and 2019, China invested $27 billion in Iran in sectors ranging from utilities, real estate, transportation, and chemicals. Chinese President Xi Jinping paid a state visit to Iran in 2016, the first by a sitting Chinese president in 14 years. He said he hoped for a new chapter in relations with Iran. He also oversaw the signing of 27 agreements in areas including politics, economy, security, and peaceful nuclear energy. When Iran was entrenched in its battle against COVID-19, China sent medical volunteers and medical supplies, such as testing kits. Now, this relationship has served both countries' interests for many years. More recently, both sides have been reportedly working on a 25-year long-term cooperation agreement, which was reported by the New York Times on July the 11th. And this leads to my topic today. The New York Times published a report on the story, but its interpretation of a largely commercial agreement would make Adolph Ochs, the one-time legendary owner of the Times, turn in his grave, given he created the paper's famous slogan, "All the news that's fit to print." This news piece seems to have mixed fact reporting and opinion peddling, which could mesmerize readers if they don't know better. The title goes, "Defying China, U.S. and Iran Defying the U.S., China and Iran near trade and military partnership." Now, it pretty much sets the tone of the article, implying that the deal is both a trade partnership and a military one, and that the military aspect is at least of equal importance to economics. But do we have evidence to back it up? So far, there is no official version of the agreement that's publicly available. The paper only cited a version that it got hold of, but did not disclose any details. Therefore, our knowledge is based on the journalist's description. As for the content of the deal, the article says the partnership would vastly expand Chinese presence in banking, telecommunications, ports, railways, and dozens of other projects. In exchange, China would receive a regular, according to some, heavily discounted supply of Iranian oil over the next 25 years. The article adds the deal also calls for joint training and exercises and joint research and weapons development and intelligence sharing, all to fight the lopsided battle with terrorism, drug and human trafficking, and cross-border crimes. These are important because these are the paper's conclusion, and it pretty much limits the scope of the cooperation between the two sides in terms of any military aspect. Now, I read some Iranian media reports on this issue, and there is scant mention of the military side of things. As the article rightfully pointed out, such a partnership was proposed by Chinese President Xi Jinping during his 2016 visit to Iran. In the speech, where President Xi laid out the areas the two sides could deepen cooperation, there is no such thing as a military partnership. The Times article also spent a little column space on how the deal could benefit the Iranian people, the reason why many Iranians welcome it. Because of U.S. sanctions and threats, the limited business opportunities that European companies opened up in Iran have largely faltered after the Iranian trade deal, after the Iranian nuclear deal. So what the New York Times article does not mention is the humanitarian impact of U.S. sanctions. These sanctions have restricted Iranian resources, both in terms of available medical equipment needed for fighting the coronavirus and Iran's capacity to support people's needs during the crisis, according to international human rights watchers. Maybe the article could point out the humanitarian benefit the China-Iran partnership could bring. Instead, the article highlighted the desperation as the result of U.S. sanctions that has pushed Iran into the arms of China. Very vivid use of words. But it sounds disrespectful, even condescending, as if the Iranian government and people can't think for themselves. Similar expressions have been used often for China's Belt and Road Initiative, the usual gimmick by China or by some international journalists. Rather than humanitarian relief and economic opportunities, the New York Times article focused on the criticism of how much the Iranian government is preparing to give away to China and the concern in the U.S. that potentially dangerous flashpoints the deal is likely to create in the deteriorating relationship between China and the U.S. Look, cooperation in fighting terrorism, drug trafficking or human trafficking and cross-border crimes will be something any two decent countries in the world would do. Similar texts would appear in the U.S. State Department's official press release any day with, say, Mexico, Colombia, or the Philippines. But when it comes to China and Iran, all of a sudden, it's exaggerated into some sort of geostrategic conspiracy. To enlarge the potential scope without sound evidence is to peddle fear based on hot air. According to the article, the deal would give the Chinese a strategic vantage point on the waters which much of the world's oil transits. A strategic vantage point? China only has one foreign base so far in the entire world, in Djibouti, East Africa. That pales in comparison with the U.S.'s 800 military bases all over the world. Should Washington be alarmed by such a deal? The U.S. could forge a partnership with Iran if it chooses to. Otherwise, don't blame others for doing so. By the way, with 2 wars in Iraq and 1 still going on in Syria, what has the U.S. brought to the Middle East in the past 40 years with these mighty military capacities? The article further analyzes that at a time when the United States is reeling from recession and the coronavirus and increasingly isolated internationally, Beijing senses America's weakness. Now, reportedly, this deal was conceived in 2016. A former Iranian ambassador to China told Iranian media that it should have been signed a few years ago. So Beijing did not all of a sudden jump on the opportunity to take advantage of American weakness. The deal might not be targeting the U.S. at all. When a country needs energy and another needs the investment, they could naturally form partnerships. There could be all kinds of security benefits that arise from such a partnership. Again, this doesn't have to actively target any third country. My second example comes from the Washington Post. The paper published the article, "Trump's 2 main foreign foes plan a major pact" on July the 14th. The analysis of this matter is not as original as the New York Times, but what it lacks in novelty, it seems, is trying to make up by, well, making up things. For example, while the Times is at least honest in reporting that the military cooperation is to fight the lopsided battle with terrorism, drug trafficking, and cross-border crimes, the Washington Post asserts it would increase intelligence sharing and security cooperation, including in possible missions in Syria and Iraq. The word possible is permitted here, normally in paper, in print, if there are sources or analysts who say so. But in this case, where's the basis? Was it just the journalist's humble opinion? Then it needs to be noted. Another outlandish line comes from a sensational quote that sounds wildly tenuous, if not totally irrelevant. The quote says, "An Iranian regime whose revolutionary identity is premised on countering U.S. imperialism and Islamophobia is about to ratify its total economic and strategic dependency on a Chinese government that keeps over 1 million Muslims in re-education camps." As I said, China needs Iran just as Iran needs China. Why should such a deal make Iran totally dependent on the Chinese government? When countries change leadership, they could put on hold Chinese investment projects as they see fit, and this happened a few times. Where is the complete dependency that the expert mentioned? I would like to see such an example before the paper incorporates such a bold claim. Another quote from an obscure reporter even likened the proposed deal to the 1828 Treaty of Turkmenchay between Persia and Tsarist Russia, under which the Persians ceded control of territory in the South Caucasus. Factually irrelevant and logically insane. I would like to revisit this article when the details of the deal come out. If the deal does not mention such details, will the Washington Post, by the way, take back the story or make corrections or apologize for having incorporated such far-fetching quotes? Or, under the disguise of anonymity, can one say anything and can one publish anything? In that case, if the answer is yes, I would give it a pass with a sigh. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, I'll ask my guests what they think of the media coverage of the China-Iran cooperation deal and the potential impact of it. We'll be right back.
Making sense of the overwhelming wave of information means cutting through the noise to shine a light on the heart of the story and making room for new perspectives. True understanding means the ability to see events from more than one side. I'm Liu Xin, and this is The Point.
Welcome back, and thank you for sticking with us. Now, I have on the line Professor He Wenping, Senior Research Fellow from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and from Iran, I have Bobby Naderi, journalist, columnist, and political commentator, as well as member of the Writers Guild of Great Britain. Welcome to both of you. We might have an American guest as well, but I'm not seeing his headshot at this moment, so I'll introduce the American guest as soon as he becomes available. We have tried to reach out to 3 different parts of actors in the story, and I have been giving that very long monologue about this China-Iran cooperation deal and the perception it has created. Let me go to Professor He first. Tell us a little bit about your understanding of this China-Iran cooperation deal that lasts 25 years. Exactly what is it about, and what's the purpose of this deal in the first place?
I think this is a very interesting thing to see China, now Iran, is going to strengthen our bilateral relations. Even me, it's also a little bit surprising to know this deal we are going to cover as long as like 25 years, and also the pledge of the money we are going to be like $400 billion. It's a big money. So I think, of course, people will think this is a new this approach will strengthen bilateral ties. People will naturally think, of course, nowadays, China-U.S. the relationship now is going down day by day, month by month. And also people are saying now it's all-time no time. So is that a kind of joint effort, China-Iran together to deal with those pressure coming from U.S.? I think this is natural thinking. Even myself, I think this is the kind of way I think China support Iran to hold on, to keep them in the the nuclear deal. The nuclear deal is not easy for Iranian side to abide by and remain in the deal because the U.S. hasn't given any reward to Iranian side, even though they have been keep their commitment in a very good way. So I think because Iran now facing a lot of pressure, one is this COVID-19, this pandemic, another is economic issue. Now it's also in a very challenging time. So the sanction, even U.S. want to put more sanction, and even those arms embargo just around the corner, October, and they want to continue to give this embargo on Iran. So I think being one of the signatory country in this JCPOA, so China should do something to help Iran.
Yeah, let me try to bring some of the comments that we have heard so far on the subject, for instance, by Michael Morrow, who is former acting and deputy director of the CIA. He says, China and Iran win, we lose. This is a direct result of our go-it-alone policy on Iran. This is a key reason why so many, including Tillerson and Mattis, were against the U.S. withdrawal from the Iranian nuclear deal. Policy missteps have real consequences. Professor He, okay, this is another one. Here we take a look at another one by Bonnie Glaser, who is Senior Advisor for Asia at the CSIS, an international think tank. She says, defying U.S., China and Iran near trade and military partnership. Another data point in the evolving U.S.-China new Cold War. That's her assessment. And finally, Asal Rad, Senior Research Fellow at the National Iranian-American Council, idea that Iran and China are defying U.S. implies the U.S. has authorities over them. Nations making deals isn't scandalous. It's the same politics and business that the world partakes in every day. But the framing reviews U.S. logic. Everyone must obey or else. Now, we don't understand. We tried to get an American guest, but the last minute he just couldn't be reached. Unfortunately, otherwise we would have an American perspective. Supposedly this guest is a supporter of the Trump administration's policies. Nevertheless, let's try to get our Chinese guest to comment on some of the comments that I just read. Professor He, what do you think of the various perceptions? For instance, Michael Morrow thinks that this is China win, China-Iran win, U.S. lose, and he believes that this is why the U.S. shouldn't have withdrawn from the JCPOA.
Well, I don't think that this is anything like goes to a zero-sum game. It's not a who win and who lost. Actually, U.S. lost its speaking power by its own decision. That is, unilaterally withdraw from this nuclear deal, Iran nuclear deal. That's why he lost his speaking power. But China, Iran, we reach another deal for the economic cooperation. This is very natural things for the two countries to strengthen the economic cooperation. So it's nothing to say who lose, who gain. Of course, China, Iran, we gain because we strengthen our cooperation. And think this is another gain for this JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, because with those help hand coming from China, and if Iran can have better off the economic development, the economic situation, like as far as I know, if those deal, this deal will cover like to build subway system, to improve subway system in Iran, and also airport, and also the railway. So all this goes to people's livelihood. So Iranian people will enjoy those transportation. So Iranian people will win.
Yeah. What do you think of this assessment that China-Iran relations or China-Iran partnership will be another data point for the new China-US Cold War? Because some people are saying, as we are seeing, the relationship between China and the United States is deteriorating. Every day we're hearing new developments coming out which make things more difficult. So what's the implication of this closer partnership between China and Iran in the context of worsening China-US relations?
Oh yeah, that should be because Iran has been regarded as a U.S. The enemy, and so-called foe or enemy in the Middle East. So this is the thing they want to contain Iran, and also want to push Iran to renegotiate a new deal. Yeah, they don't like the old nuclear deal at all, and they also want to constrain Iran's regional influence. Yeah, you cannot play your part in Iraqi or in the Syria. So all those things are United States wants. But now, because China offered those help to Iran, of course, this United States, I think they will not feel happy at all about this deal. That's for sure. And so maybe, as they said, some White House official mentioned, they will impose very stronger those sanctions on any Chinese company. Yeah, you are engaged with Iran with all those like economic construction, whatever. So they have been doing that in the past. So I think if this deal has been reached and all those projects has been ongoing, they are going to face a lot of those pressures coming from United States. But who knows? Yeah, people are also talking about this election in the U.S. So now the Trump himself, his supporting rate is not that high. So he's worried about himself, his own second term, maybe not that guaranteed. So if Joe Biden, like this Democratic Party candidate, can be elected into White House, people are even talking about the United States want to rejoin this Iran nuclear deal. So there's another possibility also there. So if they rejoined, if foreign policy towards Iran has been changed, so will be another picture lying ahead.
Yeah. Mr. Naderi, your perspective, looking at the worsening relationship, at least for the moment, between China and the United States, what is Iran's strategic position?
Iran supports any kind of cooperation between China and the United States, and at the same time expects these countries to respect its interests in the region and beyond. That's all really. Iran wants to trade with the world community, including the United States, and Iran welcomes if the US decides to get back to the nuclear deal. But at the same time, Iran will definitely be more than happy to sign this important strategic partnership with China, because Iran needs foreign direct direct investment, and the West refuses to do just that. So why not take the opportunity right now? And even if the going gets tough, Iran is going to continue to get going because Iran doesn't have any other option.
Mr. Naderi, how do you look at the criticism or the suspicion that because of the size and and economic importance, for instance, this deal will make Iran too dependent on China, or on Chinese investment, and that potentially Iran is forced or obliged to give away too much to China? What is your analysis of these criticisms, your response?
I don't think that is the case. China is a trustworthy partner, a reliable partner. It has helped Iran when the whole world looked the other way, when the West refused to do deal with Iran, even after signing the nuclear deal. We have a lot of faith in the Chinese community. We have had a long established relations with China long before the modern times, and we have very close cultural commonalities between each others. I think we have no choice but to realize that we live in the same region and we need each other. As you just mentioned earlier, Iran needs China, China needs Iran.
Yeah. All right. We have one last comment coming from netizens. Let's take a look at that before we go. So from Khalid Masoor Siddiqui, United States has no right to give sermons to others as it itself is gravest human rights violator. It longer rules the world, but the White House is living in an imaginary world in which America is running the world. Mr. Naderi, you want to respond to that? Do you agree or not, or to some extent?
Well, that's a good question. We are not living in a perfect universe. America is not perfect when it comes to human rights. Just like America, Iran and China also have to work a lot on their human rights issues. For this to happen, I think we have to respect each other's cultures and civilizations and interests and try to come to some kind of understanding that in this particular issue, when it comes to humanitarianism and human rights, we are better off working with each other. Because as I told you, we are not living in a perfect universe. We have a lot of issues, all of us.
It's not black and white. Anyway, we thank you so much, our guests, Professor He and Mr. Naderi, joining us from Beijing and Tehran, respectively. It was a pity that we couldn't reach our American guests. Next time, we try to do better. What do you think of this show so far? And if you have any comments, any questions, or any feedback, you're welcome to leave your messages, comments in the chat room, or write me the email to thepointwithLuxin@cgtn.com. I would find interesting ones to respond to in our next live streaming next week. Thank you so much for having followed us. You can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle thepointwithlx. Thanks for watching. You've got the